How y'all doing? All right, it's great to see you. This is what, day 2 of this conference? Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for coming out and just being part of the political movement, being part of civics, the things that drive our country towards a better future. Thank you for being a part of it. And thanks for being part of this great organization that I think fights for the right kind of conservative values and the right tone and the right way to win. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk for too long because if I think we have, 45 minutes or so, and the more time we leave for questions, the more time we make this a discussion, I think the more entertaining it is, and the less likely it is that you just fall asleep because you've just been listening to people talk at you for forever. I do have some things to say, and maybe that'll drive some questions. Not so much about the specifics of what we've been up to in Congress. There's a lot, you know. I mean, when you get to Congress, you kind of choose a major. It's like going to college. You literally have orientation. You're part of a freshman class, and then you choose your committees and what you're going to focus on. You're basically choosing majors and minors, and I guess I triple major. I major on energy issues, I major on healthcare issues, and then I major on generally national security issues. Lately, that's been highly focused on Mexican drug cartels. And so that's how you start. But we can get into those details if you'd like. Just ask me questions about that stuff if you'd like. I'd like to talk to you more about what our general problem is and then how we address it. So our general problem is we have an entire political party that doesn't really believe in the whole founding documents thing. Okay, that's the general problem that we run into. More of this belief in what I would call liberal populism. I'm not really a big fan of the word populism. I know a lot on the right use it. Nationalists, populists, whatever. It means we're doing what the people want. Is that what you're doing? Because the whole point of the founding is to develop a framework for figuring out how we all live together sensibly. That's basically what politics is. In human history, we have thousands of years of history of just killing each other when we want something or we disagree on something. Politics is the art of disagreement without violence. And so it's pretty important how you establish kind of a framework to agree or disagree with each other. And that framework is set about pretty clearly in the Constitution. Populism would be just, hey, let's just take a vote. See what's more popular. And so 51% of this room could vote that the other 49% have to give the other 51% all their stuff. You can call it democracy. You can call it popular. Populism leads to strange places, right? It leads to this sort of politics of bribery, where I, as a politician, can just promise you stuff, bribe you, the voter, say, look, whatever you're feeling, it's right. Your truth is your truth, and I'm here to tell you that it's somebody else's fault that you're feeling that way, and I will take from that group and give to your group. To me, that's populism. It's telling voters what they want to hear instead of the truth. It's happening on the right. It's always happened on the left. Eventually, those political spectrums meet full circle. It's why I saw people on the right back in COVID times saying that it was a good idea to just give everyone $2,000 COVID checks. Oh, well, why not 3,000? Why not 4,000? Who cares about limiting principles? That's just some conservative jargon. Who cares? That's populism. And that's how populism infects a good conservative movement. So don't let it happen. We'll talk maybe more about that. But the left has always subscribed to this stuff. Okay? They don't really care about foundational principles, right? If you imagine yourself as a buoy floating in the ocean, a good conservative is supposed to be anchored somewhere. You can move left and right. You use your frameworks, your principles to solve problems, but you're still anchored. And those foundations are important, right? They're moral foundations, they're economic foundations, they're philosophical foundations, and they come from a long history of stuff that works, whether it came from Jerusalem or Rome or London or all these good ideas that we kind of figured out over time. And then our founders, good thing they were good historians even without Google. They managed to write all those principles down in Philadelphia and create this experiment that we have now that we're so intent on protecting. But a liberal isn't really anchored into anything because they tend to believe that, well, they're progressive, right? They should just keep progressing towards whatever new emotional whim the public has. This is why I call it populism, right? They love to tell people what they want to hear based on the emotional trend at that time. I mean, shit, right now it's like, let's transition children into a different sex. Like, you didn't believe that 5 minutes ago. No freaking way. You believed that 5 minutes ago, and now it's like your thing. I mean, come on. Because they have no anchor. Right? And there's some good liberals that you know, right? There's some liberals who I think they just feel more, right? I think they're genuinely concerned about things like inequality and injustices. Like, there's some good liberals. There's a good balance between good conservatism and good liberalism. But the problem with liberals is that they're easily persuaded by progressives. Or leftists, or whatever we want to call them. But we do have to classify them differently because they are different. And progressives are on a whole different level, right? Progressives are like, let's just tear it all down, French Revolutionary style, and just start over. Just start over because everything sucks. And every problem we have, it's because of the system and the Constitution. That's pretty dangerous, right? That we have some history to maybe look back to see what happens when you do that, like the French Revolution. And they had this whole thing called the terror, which, like, there's no good way to define the terror. It means terrorist, like, it means bad stuff. And it means a lot of people died. And that's effectively what their solutions are. Tear it all down, start anew. Why? Because they're utopianists, fundamentally. And so they're always striving for utopia. They're always thinking in their heads, God, I wish everything should be so much perfect than it is now. We should have this. We shouldn't have these problems. Human nature should be different. So they're always trying to change human nature. And they never will be successful. And the more they try, the more they'll actually deteriorate the society they're trying to help. We see it over and over and over again. You see it in our greatest cities that have been infected by this disease, this ideological disease. The proof is right there. And you don't have to look just in the last 10 years. You can look throughout human history. So this is effectively what you're dealing with. And you're dealing with people who say that their foundations are things like injustice and inequality and compassion. So they think very differently. And, but they also define those words very differently. They don't define injustice the way I think of, like, our courts would define injustice. They define injustice quite differently. So you should define it as person A infringes on the inalienable rights of person B. Their life, liberty, or property. Maybe they steal from them. Maybe they harm them physically, intrude on their property. There's lots of ways to define that. Maybe they do something completely unfair. Maybe you hire somebody because they're your friend, and you didn't hire somebody who's more qualified. You could argue that that's an injustice. They don't really define injustice that way. They define injustice as disparities. Right? They see disparities throughout society, and they say that, well, there's clearly an injustice there as opposed to other factors that contribute to that disparity. That's one way they do it. They see groups of people, on average, doing worse than other groups of people on average, and they say that's because of an injustice, therefore you must punish the group doing better. Right? So they have these like sort of 6 degrees of separation of injustice. I had this debate with student at Harvard. She was like an editor at the Harvard Crimson, and this court case had just come down about affirmative action, and it was an interesting conversation. I wish I had recorded it just for my own podcast, because she brought up this sort of form of injustice, right? Like, how can but because some people, let's say this group of people, based on their ancestry, possibly is doing worse, therefore shouldn't you punish them? And I tried to lay it out for her in this way. You cannot define injustice that way. Look where this leads. You're literally, it's 6 degrees of separation. You're literally punishing someone who had nothing to do with this other person, who also had nothing to do with the previous injustice years earlier. Like, that's a real problem, but that's how they define it. Inequality, they define rather differently too. You might define inequality or say unfair inequality as you working for 10 hours but getting the exact same benefit that somebody who works for only 2 hours, right? That would be some kind of unequal treatment. They define it totally different, right? They think that everybody should just have the exact same thing, no matter how much they work. So there's a very different definitions being used by the left. You have to understand how they think before you even start debating them on whatever issue you want to debate them on. We are operating from a different framework. Conservatives should be operating from a different framework. And that framework should be basically based on limiting principles. When we examine a policy, we have a framework with which to examine that policy. And it's based on limiting principles. It's based on certain questions. Right? Does this policy infringe on the rights of an individual? Does, for the benefit of the rights of someone else? And you can think of some examples that would do that. Look at like healthcare for all. Well, you could force doctors to treat everyone we want them to treat, and we could also force them to take a certain amount of payment for that. What would that make them, though? It'd make them conscripts in the healthcare system. You would be taking away their freedom to, one, sell their labor the way they want to, and to work the amount of hours they want to. You could make someone feel safer by taking away somebody else's guns, but you're infringing on that person whose guns you're taking away, because now they can't defend themselves, just to make somebody else feel better who is not connected to them at all. Right, so we ask these questions about fairness and about infringement on personal rights. We ask if it's fiscally sustainable. The left doesn't really care about fiscal sustainability. We at least ask. I'm not going to say we have an amazing track record with that either, but at least we ask the questions. God, at least we pretend to care. Is this going to be fiscally sustainable for our next generation? If we just keep giving benefits to people in order to bribe them for their votes, is this going to be fiscally sustainable? That is a limiting principles question. Here's another one, which gets to the problem of giving people free money, just because it's COVID, right? Does the policy that you're proposing create independence or dependence? Is it a hand up, or is it just dooming them to a lifetime of dependence on government? And what is the limiting principle? How do you examine that number, that right number? That's why I got so mad at our own side when they start going that direction, because our side becomes so obsessed with winning and beating the left that they forget about their own principles sometimes. This has happened way too often. The left weaponizes government, so we have to weaponize government. The left wants to bribe people, so we have to bribe people. And it just becomes the politics of anger and resentment, and it's not a winning message. And also, you'll never outbribe the Democrats, right? You'll never outspend them. You'll never just give free stuff them. That was really good English. Don't worry about it. Trust me. I went to Harvard. And so you can't fight on those grounds. You actually have to fight for who we are. What is conservatism? People ask. I say, look, it is a series of limiting principles that gives us a framework with which to solve problems. That's what conservatism is. It is a process-oriented philosophy. Liberalism is a whatever the heck you want it to be kind of philosophy, depending on the trend at the time. Now, to be clear, there's some healthy balance if those two things are in balance. There's something healthy about that, because there's one side that wants constant change, and there's one side that says, hold on, we have a framework with which to deal with change, right? We have some inalienable rights that we have to adhere to. When we look at change. It doesn't mean we can't change, it just means we have to be careful about it. So in theory, that's a really healthy balance. In reality, it's gotten more and more unhealthy. And so if our side wants to win, we got to really talk about what winning actually means. This is another problem I have with our current political movement. It seems that we're a little bit more interested in being entertained than we are with winning. Democrat voters are really interested in winning. If you haven't noticed. Democrat activists are really interested in winning. They get together, they register voters, they go knock on doors, they do what it takes to win. Remember where they come from, right? They come from organized labor. They're very good at organizing. The right has always been very individualistic when it comes to our activism, and as of late, I'm not sure that I see people wanting to win. I see some. I think YAF is one of the good ones. I think YAF is one of the organizations that clearly talks about winning. You bring people in, you get your education, and I think you're hearing the right things so that you can go take that out and then win. So what is winning? Well, winning is persuading in politics. So in war, my background in SEAL teams, winning is something a little different. It means overtaking the enemy. Overtaking, it's a euphemism, but you know what we mean. But you're definitely not going to overtake the enemy with some wild-eyed charging of the hill, right? I mean, you might get lucky, but the most likely scenario is that you die on that hill. And there seems to be way too many people in politics who value dying on that hill a heck of a lot more than they value winning. So the real way you actually overtake the enemy is, let's say they're firing at you. First you do this, and you never look cool when you're getting shot at. I would love it if when I got shot at, I was like, what was that? But it's not. You're like, ah! That's what was, and then you move, right? And so That's what actually happens. You find cover behind whatever cover is available, and then you start communicating with your teammates, and then you figure out how to overtake the enemy. You usually divide into maneuver element, a base element to fire, and then you tack around and hit them from the flank, and then you win. It doesn't look that sexy. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but it's not as sexy as charging the hill and winning like John Wick against a bunch of gunmen who, for some reason, just don't back away from him and shoot him. He is the most amazing enemies ever, right? I love the movies, but come on. So easy to kill John Wick. It's so easy. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. But the point is, that's how you win, right? Like, you got to calm down. You got to think about what winning looks like. And the same is in politics. And then you have to define what winning even is. Winning is not dying on a hill every single freaking week. It's not winning. There's no strategy to that. Winning is persuading. Because you need to persuade people if you're going to win elections. Because if you're going to win on the policy front, if you're going to get your policies forward, which I would hope is our goal, then you actually have to have big wins on elections. You have to have majorities. In the Senate, you got to have a 60-vote majority. And they have to be sustainable. Right? You can't win a tiny little majority and then completely screw over your vulnerable members who won you that majority right away. So you have to win elections, you have to win majorities, and they have to be sustainable majorities. That's what winning actually looks like in politics. And it's not immediate. It's never immediate. And it's slow. And it's a little bit at a time. And it's one thing at a time. We had these kind of debates when we were talking about the debt ceiling vote, for instance. Why can't we get everything we want right now? Because we live in the political reality we live in. If you want to write a fiction novel about a different political reality, by all means, write that pretty little fiction novel, but it will be a fiction novel. Reality actually matters. And winning actually matters. And if we're going to persuade people, we got to talk about how we persuade people. You always have to start with your basic principles. And if we don't even understand what conservatism is and why it's a superior governing philosophy to liberalism, we're going to have a hard time explaining to someone why policy X, Y, and Z is also better than what the left wants. Because we don't even know the why of how we got to that policy conclusion in the first place. It's why I always talk about basic principles with groups like this, because it's always where you have to start. And then we can talk about the details of policy and how we actually apply those frameworks to each individual policy and why we're not contradicting ourselves, or how sometimes we are. It's important. Winning is important. And when you persuade somebody, whether it's in your class or one of your friends, you got to ask, what kind of behavior is persuasive? Yelling and screaming is definitely not persuasive, right? Calling them names is definitely not persuasive. Owning the libs is not persuasive. It's good sometimes, right? I do it, but I do it for very specific reasons. I mean, we've always have to be calculated and measured in how we approach this, right? It's a strategy. It's the political game. And time again, though, you persuade someone by understanding where they're coming from first, understanding the psychology of their beliefs, which is why I talk about kind of the background of how liberals think, at least the good ones, the ones that are persuadable. The progressives are not persuadable. You can just own them. But you have to think about that, because look, it's good to be a conservative, but you don't have to be angry about it. There's too many people who just want to be angry about it and are very much only concerned with speaking to their own side, because that's beneficial for them in the moment. And then when I say them, it could be a politician, it could be a podcaster, it could be a news host. There's a lot of them. And they're interested only in the political entertainment industry. They're not interested in helping you persuade people in your hometown so that you can actually win elections and get the policies that you care about moved forward. They're not interested in that at all. They're interested in you clicking on their website, on their podcast, on their donation button for their campaign. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in you winning. They're fighting for something, I'll tell you that, but they're fighting for your attention. They're not fighting for you. Be very wary of those types. If we don't win against the left, we do run the risk of losing the freedoms that have made this country so great. And this is a great country. Remember Reagan said, you know, if we lose our freedoms here, there's nowhere else to escape to. Boy, is that true. It is fundamentally true. You see it in European countries. You see what's happening with their free speech laws. I mean, you see it in so many ways. You guys are informed on this. I don't need to explain it to you. Our country is such an amazing experiment. It's built on all the greatest ideas that humankind ever had. We were so lucky with our founding fathers, and they took all those great ideas from all throughout history, and they wrote them down in Philadelphia in 1776, and they said, this is why government should even exist. This was the first time anyone ever said this. It should exist to protect the individual rights of the citizen. Inalienable, natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's such an important, that's the most important part of the Declaration of Independence. And then it complained about the British for a lot because they were being jerks. And then just over a decade later, we wrote the Constitution, which told us how we would actually implement that dream, right? It's like the guide. It's like the governing guide. And the Bill of Rights is how I would say, I guess, the cherry on top. It solidifies those things. And if we don't protect those, we have nothing left. We're the last country on earth that does it. I think we should be proud of that. And I don't think we should be too pessimistic either. There's always, it's constant, right? There's this constant negativity, like we're about to lose it all. Everything's about to go down the shitter. I don't necessarily think that's true. America's very hard to screw up, right? Geographically, we're pretty blessed. We've got a very stable constitution. There has been jackasses trying to screw up this country for a couple hundred years now. And honestly, they haven't been that successful. And I think a little bit of gratitude for our country and even what we've been through as a country might be in order every once in a while, because nobody wants to listen to somebody who's angry and resentful. It's a turnoff. It's a turnoff no matter what you're trying to talk to them about. So as we move forward, and the goal is winning, and the goal is persuading others, I need you to be happy warriors. I need you to be well-informed warriors. I need you to be warriors for freedom. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Look forward to your questions.